has anything to say about the deindustrialization of this country.
Georgian townhouses on the moon, the highest GDP per capita in the Milky Way. Small modular reactors under every village green. This is Anglo-futurism. Listeners, viewers, welcome back. We're here with Meri at Lindus, and you seem a very naturalised man. You're wearing corduroy, one of our great fabrics, and yes, you have moved your company to the US. Why do you hate Britain?
Come on. So firstly, we haven't. We are transatlantic. We have about 150 people full time, and about half of them are still in the UK. But look, I'm not going to deny there are strong forces pulling us to the U.S. I would turn the question on you and say, why have you forced this putative British success story to decamp to the U.S.? And look, I think this gets lost in a lot of the ink spilled and conversations on this topic. Is like the reason companies move to the U.S. It's not necessarily because of capital availability. Like we've been funded up to Series B primarily by European investors. It's just the market, right? Like markets aren't big enough in Europe or in any one European country to sustain global category dominant companies. Who just stay in that country, right? And this is like the harsh reality is like, if you want to build category defining tech companies, whatever companies, in the UK, you need to grow the economy, right? And that is, I actually think it's very easy, but successive governments have found it very difficult for reasons that would be a totally different podcast. But actually, there's maybe an exception in life sciences.
Well, there's not enough lab space, right? That's part of the...
Yeah, obviously, like, planning is a joke. This is an example, right? Like, look, if the government just, like, why haven't they fixed planning? It's a screamingly obvious thing.
So I read a few years ago that it costs 10 times as much per square foot of lab space in London than in Boston.
Yep.
It really is something like 10 times.
Probably, yeah. I mean,
possibly depends whether you're putting your labs maybe in Kensington versus
that's I mean, certainly than the US, right? Like the average lab space in the UK would guarantee you be way more expensive than in the US. And look, it is relevant, like where it is, right? Like lab space in Oxford or whatever is going to be Cambridge is going to be way more valuable than lab space in, I don't know, somewhere not close to a big university. So yeah, I mean, this is a good example of like, well, actually, maybe taking a step back. So I do think that, as it stands today, the UK, there is a unique opportunity to build world-beating companies in life sciences from the UK, simply because to be a world-leading company in life sciences, you don't necessarily need to be selling a product. Like you can build a, 10, 20, $30 billion biotech company without ever having, gotten to approval. And so, but what really matters is, density of talent and quality of talent and, arguably some element of access to clinical trials. And all of those things the UK has in spades. But yeah. And so, you do see plenty of biotech success stories, but I think there could and should be more. Yeah.
And it's you mentioned talent. I mean, Britain seems to produce good people. Is there an issue of like
speaking as a young man in biotech,
speaking as a young life scientist, I sprained my wrist patting myself on the back. Do you find that like that's easy? Is it the lack of talent? Is it then sort of like hiring, firing? Like what's the sort of situation on this?
So this is one thing that no one talks about. The single hardest thing about building the company so far in the UK has been notice periods. So I guess particularly because we operate effectively quite a service-heavy model, right? Like our clinical trials are a blend of software and humans. But like, oh fuck me, like the most frustrating thing is 3-month notice periods, and there actually isn't much. There's some legislation around this, but it's more just like convention. So when you want to hire someone, they typically have a 3-month notice period in their employment contract. So let's say this happens to us. We've won a bunch of new clinical trials. We want to make sure we have the staff to be able to deliver them. We need to staff up ahead of those trials starting. Okay, we need to hire a bunch of people. That takes time to hire good people, right? And then, once we find those people, they then have a 3-month notice period between, resigning at their job, they work out their notice period, they join us. And it's incredibly frustrating. It really puts a brake on how quickly we can grow. It's incredibly ineffective because, let's face it, once you've resigned from a job, like, you're not exactly going to be doing your best work, right? If your motivation isn't there. And it effectively acts as like a transfer from the most productive companies, who are by definition the ones growing and hiring, to the less productive companies that people are resigning from, and to, frankly, employees to be unproductive. And so that is something that, like, I just seems like a complete no-brainer to me to really restrict the circumstances when you can have a notice period more than, say, a month. I mean, the U.S., most American contracts have or I think by law they have no notice period, or it's only a couple weeks or something. And honestly, we're very fortunate that very few people have resigned from Lindus Health, but the couple of occasions that's happened, even a couple weeks is enough to fully hand over even a kind of senior productive person's work. So yeah, that's that's something that no one really seems to talk about, that is just so frustrating, that should be an easy fix.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you say about the transfer, right? It's like, this isn't there. Some people benefit from this, and other people don't. And you say, I'll just go back to the thing you said about services and software, right? Like, I think it's maybe worth just saying for the listeners, so they can really understand, you're not doing the medical research, you're not actually running the trials, putting sending out the nurses in their white coats. What is the sort of edge, and do you just want to explain?
Yeah.
So it's very clear.
So the first thing we are, in that,
oh, you are, okay,
in the we provide the overall study design. So what goes in the protocol, how you want to run the experiment. We kind of oversee the operations of it. So if it's a study that needs to run at physical doctors' offices, which is the majority of them, we find those sites, we set them up, train them, we oversee them. So they use our software to enter data about how the trial is going. We integrate with their health record systems to input data from their directly from their health record system. We integrate with, if they have labs on site that are taking, blood for patients. We collect all that data. We store it in our database. We do some cool stuff on it to analyze it in real time. We monitor it for potential errors, potential patient safety risks. And, we just overall do whatever it takes to keep the trial moving. Now, some trials don't need to run at a physical site at all. So the one in MECFS I was telling you about, that's completely run from participants' homes. And so we are literally providing the nurses, we employ nurses directly to visit patients in their home, or to have, video calls with patients. In those cases, we do pretty much everything.
And what's this stuff? Because the thing that I think you've told us about in the past was that the ability to then design these trials in a better way, right?
Yeah.
So you're not just doing, right, we'll test one hypothesis, or we've got one model. How is that design of experiment style work happening that improves the outcomes? And I will add into that, to what extent is AI and software going to mean that you can do increasingly more of this in silico? Yeah,
cool. So I'll give you kind of two examples of where the design makes a big difference. So I guess in that MECFS example, that trial is much faster, much more efficient, and critically is able to get much better data because we've been able to set it up in a way that it can run in patients' homes, because this allows us to test it on, the sickest patients to really show an effect, and, avoid testing it on the wrong patients, which is actually what kills a lot of trials and a lot of spaces, but this space in particular. There's something else which we've been working on, which, so today clinical trials are like very waterfall. You design your trial, you run it, you analyze the data often like months after the trial is wrapped up, and like, oh, amazing, the data showed that the trial worked, great. Or, no, it didn't, and maybe it kind of worked, but maybe we didn't have enough people, or, some other problem. And hopefully that, like, you can see how that's like quite a wasteful process, right? With this like very linear waterfall process. So what we're set up to do, what our software is set up to do, is run every trial in an adaptive way. And what this means is, we have a hypothesis, we still, design the study, we know what the data, we know what data we need to capture, but we don't know how many patients we're going to enroll. And we also don't know maybe what ratio we're going to allocate those patients between the control arm and the treatment arm, and then we just let the experiment run. And our software automatically, randomizes patients without telling us, what arm they've gone on, in such a way that like we can boost our statistical power to detect more of an effect, and maybe it'll also, stop enrolling patients as soon as we've enrolled enough to show a statistical effect. And so this is like a much more, so the software is essentially analyzing the data in real time and then changing parameters of the experiment to allow us to like get the result we need, either drug works or it doesn't, in the most efficient way possible.
And that's not p-hacking.
So it's not p-hacking. Because it's unblinded, right? So you remain blinded to the experiment. So the software is analyzing the data in a way that doesn't alert the experimenters to, how the experiment is going so far. It just tells us like, okay, you can stop now. And either it's stopping because the data shows that the experiment is futile, or we've enrolled just enough patients for to hit our kind of desired level of significance. But the key thing is we're not exercising any actual control once the study runs. It's just the software that's kind of doing it itself. There's another version of adaptive studies which I also think should and will just become common practice, which is like, again, this very linear trial model where we're maybe only testing like one combination of potential patient population and flavor of the drug, but we should be testing multiple in parallel, right? So like maybe you have one control arm of 100 people, and then you have an indeterminate number of arms with like a slight variation of dose, and this kind of happens today, but not very efficiently, or like patient population. So like maybe control arm is arm 0, arm A is like people with moderate disease, moderate snoring, and a minor dose of the product. Arm B is like more severe snoring and a more a higher dose, which is, I can see the one you're excited about. And so you can basically, for the same quantity of time and also for massive cost saving, get way richer data about and try and arrive at like that optimal combination of target population and drug. And we're doing that today, which is really exciting. Yeah.
And I will ask you to say about the in silico stuff. Although it's fascinating, right? Because that seems like that's such a clear bottleneck that you would try to optimize around. Yeah. Like I had a friend who's
Let's just remind the listeners what in silico means. So you were talking about like doing this stuff virtually.
Yes. So
digital twins.
So everything I've talked about is like techniques to run. These are real clinical trials running in real patients. They're just software enables us to run them in a get more experiments for your money, essentially, or get like more data or efficacy signals for your money, or kind of more efficiently try and run the experiment in real people.
You're like simulating some kind of human subject.
No, they're not doing that.
We're not doing that.
But when you're in silico, you are.
Sorry. So in silico trials is like another kind of emerging concept where we just entirely simulate the human trial. Nothing gets tested, unfortunately, in a real patient. So, again, you're in silico testing I think it's very important
that we're authentic.
Tom's digital twin. Tom's digital twin gets a lovely night's sleep.
Maybe because you're on the control arm. So this is an area that has had a lot of excitement and investment recently. I think there's definitely a role for these in silico trials. However, I think that role is limited. And the reason is because randomized control trials, James Lindsay mentioned, are literally magic. Why? Because by randomizing participants fairly into a control arm and treatment arms, you're controlling for all possible variables without needing to know what those variables are. And so, so to run an effective in silico experiment that controls for all possible variables, you kind of need to know what all possible variables are, which is essentially impossible because human beings are, incredibly complex. And the world of research is full of these kind of bullshit, papers that aren't RCTs, but where you're looking at patient populations and you're trying to identify correlations, drinking red wine after bed reduces your heart disease risk or whatever, and it's all bullshit because there'll be some variable they didn't control for in there. So basically, all a long-winded way of saying, there are fundamental limitations to these in silico trials, and the limitation is essentially our understanding of human biology and ability to simulate the insane complexity of human biology, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. However, where these in silico trials can have a huge benefit is in specific use cases where, for various reasons, you kind of can't run a randomized control trial. So one example is late phase cancer drugs. So you have a bunch of people with late stage cancer who are basically going to die unless they get an experimental treatment. Now, it's unethical to basically, I think every person you give a placebo to is kind of unethical because you're kind of condemning them to death when they could have potentially got a life-saving treatment. And so in those cases, you can and do kind of run a synthetic control group to be able to say okay, this is a synthetic group of humans. We know how people behave when we give them this class of drug. Now let's compare the outcome to the real people with cancer who we've given the experimental drug to. Another one is psychedelics research, simply because, and I've done a psychedelic trial myself as a participant, when mine was intravenous ketamine. When you get intravenous ketamine, whether you've got the placebo or the treatment immediately.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it still seems bizarre to me. I had a friend who was he was doing a physics PhD, preparing experiments for CERN, and it was 15 years later that the experiment would actually run, but he had to do all the data analysis and pipelines, set it up in advance so that the one limiting factor when it ran, immediately the outcome would be known. It seems bizarre that you wouldn't do that kind of thing.
Was this a clinical trial?
No. This is particle physics.
Okay,
This
I was it's CERN.
No. I just think about that like that bottleneck that we not have. That it seems that given that is the limiting factor, why you wouldn't optimize around all the having the statistical work already done in advance.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, again, it's the way the industry is just the way the industry works is kind of very waterfall. There's often the way the data is collected creates loads of artifacts that need to be picked through before you can analyze the data. But what we can do with our software is eliminate most of those artifacts at source and allow us to analyze the data in real time, which unlocks this kind of this more adaptive clinical trial paradigm. I do think there is also a really cool case for in silico models that replace animal research. So firstly, with our snoring drug, we tested it in animals first, and no one wants that,
extremely
right?
annoying mice.
This is but no one wants that. Firstly because science is full of drugs that showed a positive effect in animals and then didn't in humans because the biology is very different. And secondly because I have some sympathies with animal rights activists, and I just think it's very cruel. Anyway, so yeah, I think the FDA has at least made noises to suggest that they will be encouraging people to phase out in vivo animal research in favor of in silico models, which I think is a great advance. So yeah.
How does Brexit affect all of this? Did we manage to diverge in terms of life sciences regulation?
Yes, actually pretty successfully. So the MHRA split from the EMA. The MHRA is the UK's version of the FDA, and the EMA is the EU's version. In the hierarchy of regulation, the FDA is the best, the most forward-thinking, often generally kind of very generally the easiest to work with, although it varies massively. The MHRA is a pretty close second. They are, quite forward-thinking, quite permissive about things like decentralized trials. The EMA is very far behind, perhaps unsurprisingly, and that's because a lot of the best people in that pre-Brexit body happen to be British, but also because the UK has done some good things around just legislation for things like decentralized trials, and I think also there's the UK population is a much better match for the US population than a lot of European populations, and so
in what sense?
Just demographically, ethnically, and the FDA will look at will all else being equal, will find UK data more valuable than European data. And that's also been a big strength.
Because the French are just so unlike us and so alien.
Yeah. So. I
mean, Tom, this is, if you had a child with a French woman, actually, you might be able to have the child, but the child itself would be sterile. A mule-like child, good only for hauling bricks.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think generally, the UK has, let's say it's not been as much of a missed opportunity as other areas have been post-Brexit. I'll put it that way.
And on this, I think you said about the markets, I suppose if the European market or the health regulators were more open, does that allow you to sell more in Europe, or is it just that the consumers are basically less the drug buyers are less aggressive in their want to bring new drugs to market? What's the sort of trade-off there? Because you said when growth happens, you get more clinical trials, you get more of a market. Surely people get sick. I mean, in many ways, actually, a country on the decline has plenty of sick people that need treating. What's the sort of calculus there in terms of what limits or affects drug purchasing?
Oh gosh. Yeah. This is. I'm now way outside of my area of expertise. In terms of you're asking basically about the size of the drug market.
The sort of the markets, the purchasing. What causes this stuff to happen or not happen?
I mean, you're correct that fundamentally it is the Q in biology of the country, right? And due to complex cultural factors, some diseases are more prevalent, or complex cultural and biological factors. Some diseases are more prevalent in some countries than others. I mean, basic example, countries with higher rates of smoking will probably have more demand for lung cancer drugs, right? I
suppose then GLP-1s is quite nice.
Yeah, exactly.
So a disease of affluence in an affluent country is a beautiful, beautiful thing to target.
Yes, yeah. And I was thinking of lots of kind of borderline conspiracy theory examples there around. Anyway, but let's not go there. I will say that talking to a lot of scientists who were at the forefront of COVID research, talking to them and working with them literally in the company has made me much more skeptical of the scientific establishment and just whether it is truly independent from political concerns. I think I can say that much. But anyway, that aside, sorry to actually come back to your question. Yeah, I mean, look, it's a mix of the sort of socio-biological factors in that country, and then the country's healthcare system and purchasing decisions. And you can see that in the UK, right, where the UK punches way below its weight as a drug market because NICE sees its role primarily to get the lowest price possible for drugs, even if that means greatly delaying when the drug is sold, unfortunately, in the UK, or when the drug is distributed in the UK. Yeah,
so NHS is a race to the bottom.
Yes, but as we were talking about earlier, there are ways it could. You could be much more creative with how the NHS works.
Well, tell us how policymakers could make your life easier and could make clinical trials better in this country.
Wow, yeah. So firstly, I don't want to there are many ways in which fundamentally, this is a great place to run clinical trials.
But if we want to be the best in the world and to create like 100 unicorns, I mean, we're lagging well behind like life sciences unicorns, right?
Yeah.
How do we do that? How do we get to the top?
Cool.
I want to
jump in.
We're just if we say that a clinical trial, like the amount that they're doing, is like a national resource, right?
Yeah.
Like you have you need as a country, it's like a strategic benefit.
Yeah, which it literally is, right? I mean, COVID shows that. Yeah.
Well, think how much like leverage Denmark have with Eli Lilly. Maybe not, or Novo Nordisk even. Not so much anymore. Now the other
exactly the problem is the Chinese peptides.
But this worked, all right. The UK would have had an appallingly much worse pandemic if so much of the fundamental research into vaccines and COVID treatments wasn't done here, and it was. So like dexamethasone, the recovery trial, that was an enormous success. I'm getting ahead of myself because this is part of the wish list, but okay. So let me. So one, there's like the low hanging fruit stuff. So for God's sakes, just like implement standardized contracting, make it easier to pay the NHS to do the research, whatever the procedures, insert the enormous pill into your nasal cavity. Second part of the wish list actually is the UK has a pretty good centralized ethics committee system for because you need to get, I will concede that you kind of need ethical approval to run clinical trials, like maybe particularly this one, right? It has a great centralized system, but again, the actual committees you go to get the approval are made up of volunteers. And I hate even bringing it up, but the Hanforth Parish Council video, whatever, is it's like that. Right, so you're talking to a committee of people who, some are doctors and scientists, but we have seen the most unhinged shit go down on these committees. So
really, like what?
Like someone delaying the start of a phase 2 oncology trial for non-responders for other therapies, right? So these people are going to die. Someone who delayed the start of an oncology trial because they felt the font was too small in some of the documents, and they were upset that they couldn't read them, and maybe if this was given in paper to someone, they couldn't read it and thus sign a consent form, and that delays it by at least 4 weeks because the committee only meets every 4 weeks. We've had trials. We had a trial delayed because one of the people on the committee, it turns out, is very religious, and we were running a trial for a test to detect STIs, and this person insisted that we kind of that we tell participants that they should practice abstinence, that you basically use it as an opportunity to promote abstinence, and this apparently resulted from a religious conviction this person had. So they're just pretty insane stuff. But so basically for again, just in the US, you can pay a private company, a regulated private company, to convene an ethics committee to approve your research. And it is so much faster. It costs $5,000 or $10,000 to do, but oh my God, I would infinitely rather do that. They give us quick, good feedback, and in a week we can, we can start the study. So that's a no-brainer. Have the same centralized system, but just make it possible. Actually pay the people who sit on it. Implement some rigorous standards of the quality of judgment you get from these ethics committees, and in return, make it self-funding. Private companies would just pay to do this, right? That's kind of a no-brainer. And then the more difficult stuff. Just making the UK an attractive market for people to sell drugs into, and this is more difficult because it requires serious political capital to be staked on reforming the NHS, or at least forcing the NHS to be more creative, shall we say? But I'll stop there because it's obviously a big rant.
Yeah, and I was going to say, if you get FDA approval, does that doesn't automatically carry over, or it does?
No,
what's the sort of exchange? Is there
So in
regularizations?
medical devices, it does, which has been a big triumph post-Brexit. So basically, if you get FDA approval for a medical device, you automatically get approval in the UK, which is great. What would be amazing is to have the reverse, so both ways. That would be awesome.
So it's only one way?
It's only one way at the moment,
okay.
I believe. Yeah. For drugs, I mean, the way it ends up working is the data package you collect will basically involve numerous countries, and it's kind of designed to sort of fit the like slightly varying requirements of each country. And so for like one, hellishly expensive trial, phase 3 trial, I'll at least get approval in like Europe, Japan, the US, South Korea, whatever. But in theory, yes, you kind of need, there's the MHRA would have like slightly different requirements sometimes from the FDA, often.
It does seem that in many of these situations, like the benefit comes is when, as you say, you can just put money in, and like if I'm willing to do it, if I'm willing to pay, like actually many things would be improved. I don't know, I'm trying to think. Can you think of like a situation? I suppose there's a sense that if you're paying the quality, then there's like an incentive to then agree, like the ratings agencies and the subprime mortgage like problem. But it does seem in many situations, yes, I'm willing to put up cash, get that gradient, right? Money in, outcome out. Yeah. Make that just like a cleaner transaction.
Yeah. And I think and like it works in the US, right? Like there are instances, but they're very few and far between, of like these for-profit IRBs approving essentially bad research. Maybe we can test, we can put them through their paces with our...
The amount of money that Tom would be willing to spend to bribe and prejudice a jury in order to get this through is frankly horrific.
It's true.
But like, what else could we do to we sort of like touched on this idea earlier of, like turn the NHS into a pharma company, right? Like, and this has kind of half been done. So I referred to this this famous clinical trial called the recovery trial earlier, where basically, this guy Martin Landry, who's a kind of a, I guess, public health researcher, ran this like very fast, pragmatic clinical trial in COVID, testing a bunch of different COVID treatment options against each other. We have staff on our team who were involved in this trial with him, and it was a huge success. They discovered that dexamethasone, this relatively cheap drug, was pretty effective. It was like pretty much the only, or for a while, the only effective thing at reducing the chance of COVID mortality in people with severe COVID. It's a huge success. And the idea would be to just have the NHS do that, but with with other drugs, right? They could be, cheap drugs. They could be more conventionally, patent protected for-profit drugs. But maybe the NHS would just like run these trials for free. And actually, the recovery trial, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was remarkable. It was extremely cheap in drug trial terms. But basically, have the NHS run this trial, and in return, they then own a share of the drug, and they could then, look, we've run phases 1 to 3 on the NHS for very low cost, very quickly, and now we are, the distributor of this drug, or maybe we sell the license to a pharma company who distributes it, but we earn a significant royalty from it, by selling it to the US. I mean, that would be a incredible move, because British patients will get access to the drug sooner, and it would be incredibly, if you could do enough of these, it would be incredibly an incredibly profitable endeavor, because you're able to run these trials so much cheaper than conventionally running them on the US healthcare system.
Yeah, I note that you're not saying that we should dismantle the NHS and that it's a total blocker. There is a version of the future where we have... all right, with the circumstances. I mean, you're all but describing fully automated luxury NHS.
Yeah, but I think, okay, so would today's NHS ever go for that? Would today's political economy ever do that? No. And so I think to effectively bring that vision into reality, you would need to fundamentally re-architect the NHS around a for-profit model. And so now I am going to come down the side of, or you just need some like fundamental kind of, or you would need to expend some, but probably in the circumstances not that much, because the NHS is increasingly, people are increasingly kind of unhappy and dissatisfied for good reason.
What, and is that for profit? What you can have an arm, a commercial arm that acts in its full right. When you say it's a lot cheaper running it on the NHS, is that just because you've got the hospitals already, you've got the nurses already?
With the recovery trial, the reason it was, there were several. There's a recovery trial, Panoramic in principle, and our VP of clinical operations, she was one of the key people behind Panoramic in principle, 2 of these trials, and actually Panoramic and Principle were fully remote, and that was the reason they were done so cheaply. But not all trials can be fully remote. So if we take recovery as an example, it was basically like the team behind it through like force of will, like okay, contract with me immediately, set this up immediately, we will embed the clinical trial protocol into like the standard care you're delivering to patients. Basically, by really tight integration with the health system, you can just run this trial so much faster and so much cheaper in a way that's not really possible to do unless you like are the health system yourself, is kind of the key lesson.
And going back to those policymaker recommendations that you issued earlier, if all this happens in the way that you suggest, 50 years from now, what would it mean for the average Brit? I mean, are we all going to have access to like incredible drugs?
Basically,
no baldness, no fatness, no snoring.
Look,
I mean, what does it mean?
So if you believe in the premise that, we are not constrained by hypotheses, right? Like medical hypotheses about a drug that works, about the snoring pill. Which I think is increasingly true, but particularly in the age of AI. So like Demis Hassabis, when he accepted his Nobel Prize in Medicine, he said like, oh, look, thanks to this, we're going to cure all human disease in 10 years. In a sense, he's right, or he's possibly right, because this just opens up, like it allows us to do way more searching, right, for potential drug target combinations. But
the cure is created. It's just not distributed. Basically.
Exactly. Yeah. But the bottleneck is very much these like messy in-person clinical trials, right? Sorry, I forgot your initial. Oh yeah.
50 years from now, average price. Yeah.
So basically, so if we can crack, through our method or through the fully automated luxury NHS method, opening this bottleneck of like how do we safely test 10 times, 100 times as many iterations of potential drugs and treatments at scale, that we just inevitably you will have this like healthcare bioabundance.
And this has to happen for us to kind of cure cancer. And this has to happen for us to kind of cure cancer, cure Alzheimer's, live to 200.
Yeah.
Everything comes down to clinical trials.
Well, it's funny that. But no, look, I mean, until AGI is good enough to like completely simulate, the human body.
But it'll still be up against human legislation.
No, but isn't the point right? Like, even if you crack it a little bit wider, we've got this far on our current system.
But if we had an AI that said, I've cured cancer, I've solved longevity,
but
all this kind of thing, there's no snoring, we would still be like, no, we've got to put you through some trials.
And also longevity, how do you test it? It's a black swan. It's a black swan problem. They could die tomorrow.
Because you cannot objectively claim that you've cured cancer until you've tested it in enough humans, right? Yeah. So almost by definition, very clearly the industry is telling us like the human testing part is the bottleneck. Yeah.
I'm just taking back is that point that you made, and I think it bears stressing, is how like time wasted setting these things up is actually often more expensive or just as expensive as the actually paying to get the people in, paying the nurses.
It's more expensive. The opportunity. So because of the way patents work in life sciences, every day that ticks by is, I think literally on average worth something like hundreds of thousands for the average drug, because that's like less revenue you could be earning before the patent cliff. And when a drug goes off patent, it becomes generic and you kind of stop earning revenue from it. So from the pharma company's perspective, who is developing that drug, speed should be incredibly important for running these clinical research studies. Yeah. But of course, you could say that oh, well, that only benefits the pharma company, but then they reinvest that right into fundamental R&D. And so,
Well, as we have provocatively, I don't know if you would actually agree with this, but I when I try to wind people up, I say the American healthcare consumer is the most moral person on the planet.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, thank you.
Great sacrifices.
Clap for American healthcare.
Look what they put their bodies through in the name of health.
Exactly. Yeah. The supersize Dairy Queen blizzards and whatnot. Yeah, for sure.
But it does, right?
Yeah.
And this could be ours, right? We could all be 80 years old. I'm going about to be very, very vain, you know, but with like very tight, collagen-rich skin, you know, gleaming teeth, big muscles, no cancer whatsoever,
hobbling around the English Riviera.
and this could be ours. This could be ours.
I mean, this is this is our mission, right? Like we, enabling this. The limit to enabling this isn't like, for the most part, incredibly arcane, difficult, fundamental research. It's just like making it easier to test. I mean, I hate to invoke it, but this is like what Brian Johnson is kind of doing, right? He's just saying like, look, most of the stuff I'm taking, or basically all the stuff I'm taking is like freely available. I'm just like, going to test and see what works. Although he's doing it in a really dumb way because it's confounded to hell, right? Because he's like taking, hundreds of these things at once. But
the erection results don't lie.
Sorry, yeah, I know, yeah, hard to deny.
That's the thing that keeps me up at night. Is the ping?
Yeah, I was signal of efficacy. Yeah, I was searching for that. Yeah,
as Tom's a suspended bell over his bed dings. That's his readout.
We sleep in separate bedrooms. I want to make this abundantly clear. The snoring comes through the wall.
The trial endpoints. Yeah. So much of this progress is just held back by really mundane stuff. By just really mundane stuff that allows you to run these experiments faster, and that is essentially our mission. So our mission statement is literally unleashing biology century through faster, more efficient clinical trials. So yeah.
Well, Tom, with this, your hairline might even recover.
It's a distinguished Norman too.
So they've
again. I want to be clear. I've had this hairline for 15 years.
Yeah. There's a paper published a couple weeks ago where they found that just lipids, so essentially fats massaged into hair, massively promoted hair growth, albeit in mice, but we should just be able to test. I should be able to test that now, right? There should be, I should be able to run that trial for very little money, and potentially, patent and earn money from the formulation of the drug. But yeah, that's
and just on Callum's behalf, he's got a sort of callow, young man's immature hairline, almost close to his eyebrows,
undistinguished.
Is there any treatment out there that can help him? The more invasive, the better.
There is one cure for youth, and that is aging.
Try running a biotech or even any company in this space, right? There is this just you just look at the entrepreneurs and the mindset. One of the biggest biotech conferences is happening in London right now called Jefferies, and you can tell because everyone's walking around in suits, right? And it's just such a different vibe from a software conference where everyone's dressed maybe not you guys but like me, there is just this very weird different mindset, which I think ultimately stems from the way clinical trials run. You need to take years and tens of $millions to run one experiment in life sciences, and so that biases towards older people with worse hairlines than yours, versus in tech, where the person who can just ship and iterate rapidly is favored.
Well, I suppose you don't go into clinical trials, or you didn't used to go into clinical trials if you wanted an exciting life.
We're trying to make that. We're trying to fix that, as you can see from the appropriately tech-friendly accoutrements in our office. So yeah.
I think just one more thing on the agenda. Viewers who stuck with us will be wondering what the hell this cider is and what this lemon is. We've given them a clue.
So it's these are all callbacks. We have all of our meeting rooms are named after one of James Lynn's original trial arms. So we have cider, seawater, oranges, lemons. What was it? Barley water and garlic paste. And so each of the meeting rooms has a little token of that.
Probably offer a clinical trial ourselves. And
The cider.
You get the cider rather than the garlic paste.
At one of our early parties, we did literally randomize people onto different drinks, which were all, some were happier than others.
Were they all alcoholic?
Yeah.
Or only some of them?
Yes, but they all contained elements of the original.
Well, Meri, thank you for joining us in the
thanks
King Charles
for
Space Station.
Beaming
It's
us
been
up
great fun.
to your,
we will send you back down on a randomized spaceship. Some of them work and some of them don't.
Fantastic! I love it.
Cross your fingers. Thank you,
Amazing.
listeners, for tuning in, and keep listening and subscribe on anglofuturism.co to get updated when more episodes come out.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks. Cool.